High in the Rocky Mountains grows a root so incredibly prized that, it has been considered sacred for centuries. It's this elusive subalpine perennial that botanists, chemists, and indigenous healers have basically all obsessed over. But here's the wild catch. It grows in immediate, like almost terrifyingly close proximity to some of the most lethally toxic plants in North America.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about neighbors that can literally kill a human in 15 minutes.
Right. It's essentially a botanical game of Russian roulette, which, I mean, makes this specific root one of the most respected and honestly highest risk foraging targets on the continent.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate ecological high wire act. I mean, you have a plant that represents a literal cornerstone of traditional mountain medicine, and it is practically rubbing leaves with neurotoxic nightmares.
It's so crazy, and I want to dive straight into that tension with you today. We are looking at a plant officially known as Ligusticum porteri, but if you spend any time in the American Southwest, you probably know it as Osha or bear root or tuchipate.
Right, those are the common names you'll hear everywhere out there.
Exactly. And before we get into the wild chemistry and the microscopic subterranean trade agreements that keep this plant alive, I really need to look you, the listener, dead in the eye and issue a very serious reality check.
Yes, please do. This is critical.
This deep dive is purely an intellectual exploration of ethnobotany, biology, and chemistry based on a huge stack of research. We are absolutely not providing foraging instructions here because, making a mistake out there is fatal.
Fatal, not just a stomachache, but fatal.
Right. Furthermore, we aren't making medical health claims or writing prescriptions for you. We are just here to look at the science and the history.
Which is such an essential boundary to set, because the environment OSHA thrives in leaves absolutely zero margin for error.
So let's talk about that environment because OSHA is incredibly picky right now.
Oh, incredibly. It only grows at high elevations, typically between 7,000 and 11,500 feet. You'll find it running through the Rockies, the American Southwest, and way down into the Sierra Madre in Mexico.
Okay, so it's really up there.
Yeah, it demands deep, moist, organically rich subalpine soils. But the issue is when you hit that specific 9,000-foot ecotone.
Wait, ecotone, just to clarify for the listener, that's the transition zone, right?
Yeah, it's transition zone where the deep forest opens up into those subalpine meadows. When OSHA hits that zone, it shares its bed with two deadly members of its own botanical family, the Apiaceae family, or, parsley family.
It's just such a weird family of plants.
The Apiaceae family is notorious for this, honestly. It contains some of our most common culinary herbs like carrots, celery, and parsley, but it also houses our most prolific botanical assassins.
It's like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde of the plant world.
That is a perfect way to put it. And the two specific threats growing directly alongside OSHA are poison hemlock, which is Conium maculatum, and spotted water hemlock, Cicuta maculata.
Okay, let's establish the actual threat level here, because I think people hear poisonous plant and think of a rash. If someone is out hiking, they see a beautiful umbrella-shaped white flower cluster, they think it's OSHA, and they take a bite. What actually happens? Let's start with spotted water hemlock.
Right, so spotted water hemlock is widely considered the single most toxic plant in North America. The real danger lies concentrated in its roots, which contain this violent compound called cicutoxin.
Cicutoxin, okay.
Yeah, and cicutoxin is a rapid-acting neurotoxin that directly targets the central nervous system.
How does it attack the system, though? What is the actual mechanism there?
Well, it acts as an antagonist to GABA receptors in the brain.
GABA?
Yeah, GABA is essentially your nervous system's braking mechanism. It basically calms neuronal activity down. So cicutoxin binds to those specific receptors and completely blocks them.
So it cuts the brakes on your brain.
Exactly. And without that braking system, your neurons just begin firing uncontrollably, leading to massive overstimulation. The physical result is severe, violent seizures.
That is horrifying.
It is. And the timeline is incredibly compressed. A single bite of a water hemlock root can induce fatal status epilepticus in a healthy human adult in literally as little as 15 minutes.
15 minutes? You wouldn't even have time to hike back to your car, let alone get a helicopter evac out of the mountains.
No, you'd be completely out of luck.
And then there is the other neighbor you mentioned, poison hemlock, and this is the one that's famous for killing the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, right?
It is, yeah. And poison hemlock utilizes a completely different, but honestly equally devastating chemical weapon. It contains a whole suite of piperidine alkaloids.
Okay, piperidine alkaloids.
Right, the most prominent one being conine. Now, where cicutoxin causes violent overstimulation, conine does the exact opposite. It causes ascending muscular paralysis.
Ascending, meaning it starts at the bottom and works its way up.
Precisely. So conine binds to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors at the neuromuscular junction. It essentially blocks the signals from your nerves from ever reaching your muscles.
Oh, wow. So your brain is sending the signal, but the muscle just isn't getting the memo.
Exactly. So the paralysis begins in the lower limbs. You feel this heaviness and numbness in your feet that just slowly creeps up your legs and then into your torso.
That sounds like a horror movie.
The truly horrific part of conine poisoning is that it does not cross the blood-brain barrier effectively. So your cognitive function remains completely intact.
Wait, so you are fully conscious?
You are fully awake, alert, and aware as the paralysis reaches your diaphragm. And at that point, your respiratory system simply stops functioning and you asphyxiate.
That is deeply chilling. You're just trapped in your own body while it stops breathing. And I notice in the research you mentioned in your notes that conine is actually transdermal.
Yeah, it can be absorbed directly through the skin. So if you touch the bruised leaves or the sap of poison hemlock while, say, trying to identify it, and then you just casually rub your eye or wipe your mouth, you can introduce enough of the alkaloid into your bloodstream to cause systemic poisoning.
So, I mean, put yourself in this scenario. You are in a high-altitude meadow looking for this highly prized medicinal root, and you literally have to navigate around a plant that causes instant seizures and another one that causes conscious suffocation.
It's incredibly daunting.
How do traditional foragers and botanists even tell them apart? Because to the untrained eye, I mean, I've looked at pictures of these. They all just look like tall, leafy green plants with little white flowers.
They really do. It requires an intense, meticulous observation of morphological details. You cannot just look at the whole plant. You have to look at the microstructure.
Right, you have to get up close, very carefully.
Very carefully. If you're examining true Osha, you will find a solid, deeply ribbed green stem. And if you trace that stem down to the base of the leaves, right where the foliage attaches to the root crown, Osha exhibits this highly unique, subtle, reddish-pink tint.
Reddish-pink tint.
Yeah.
And what about the root itself? Because that's the part everyone is actually looking for, right?
Yeah, the Osha root is large, solid, and dark chocolate brown. But its absolute most defining physical characteristic is a dense, fibrous, hairy fringe or collar of dead leaves material right at the crown, where the root meets the stem.
Oh, like a little beard.
Exactly. It almost looks like a little beard.
Okay, so we've got a hairy collar, solid ribbed stem, and a pinkish tint. What do the assassins look like?
Well, poison hemlock is deeply deceptive. Its stems are entirely smooth, completely hollow, and hairless. And crucially, the lower stems are usually covered in these distinct, splotchy purple or dark red spots. They almost look like bruises.
Purple spots. Okay, got it.
And there is absolutely no hairy collar on the root. Now, spotted water hemlock also has a stout, hairless stem that might have some purple mottling, but its defining and honestly terrifying feature is hidden underground.
What's underground?
If you were to carefully slice a water hemlock root completely in half lengthwise, you would see that the root isn't solid. It is divided into these distinct, stacked horizontal air chambers.
Air chambers, like empty pockets.
Yeah, it looks almost exactly like the baffles inside a car muffler.
Wow. But I have to stop you here and actually challenge this based on some of the foraging research we went through, because there's a huge issue here.
What's that?
A massive number of older field guides, and even like some contemporary foraging blogs right now tell people to rely heavily on the smell test.
Oh, no.
Yeah. They say Osha has an incredibly distinct, powerful, and pleasant scent. It's described as this heavy mix of spicy celery, black licorice, and rich butterscotch.
That is how it smells, yes.
Right. And meanwhile, the hemlocks supposedly smell rank, musty, and generally like mouse urine. So the natural assumption for a hiker as well, if it smells like delicious spicy celery, you're safe, right?
Well, relying on the olfactory profile is perhaps the single most dangerous mistake a person could make in that environment.
But why? If the chemical profiles are so completely different, why wouldn't the smell be a reliable indicator?
Because of the soil dynamics. The research highlights a phenomenon of sensory deception that is frankly staggering.
Sensory deception. I love that term.
It's wild. So these plants share the exact same deep, moist, high-altitude soil. They often grow intermingled, so their roots are literally tangled together in the dark.
Okay.
The volatile essential oils that give Osha its incredibly strong celery butterscotch scent don't just stay neatly inside the plant. They actively leach out into the surrounding soil moisture.
Oh, I see where this is going. And the hemlock absorbs it.
It does. The toxic hemlock roots act almost like a sponge for those specific volatile organics. So if a water hemlock is growing adjacent to an Osha colony, the hemlock can absorb a massive amount of Osha's essential oils.
Which completely masks its own musty, rank odor.
Exactly. It completely covers it up.
It's literal chemical camouflage. That is terrifying. You pull up a root, you crack it open, it smells overwhelmingly like spicy celery and butterscotch, and you've actually just unearthed a violent neurotoxin wearing the perfume of its neighbor.
That is exactly what happens. And that detail alone proves why this is such a high-stakes game. You simply cannot rely on a single sensory input or a single physical characteristic.
You have to evaluate everything.
Right, you have to evaluate the entire morphological profile of the plant simultaneously.
Which, I mean, is a profound testament to traditional ecological knowledge. Because indigenous systems of wildcrafting emphasize deep, holistic observation over generations.
Absolutely. It's not just about running into the woods and grabbing a root based on a quick checklist.
Right. It's about intimately knowing the landscape, understanding the soil, and recognizing every minute variation within the local flora. But that brings up a really obvious question for anyone listening to this deep dive right now.
Which is?
If the stakes in the wild are so incredibly high and the chance of a fatal mistake is just always looming, why are we risking the mountains at all?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. I mean, we have massive agricultural infrastructure in this country. Why don't we just take Osha seeds, bring them down to a safe, controlled farm in the valley, plant 100 acres of it, and just harvest it with tractors?
Because Osha fundamentally refuses to be domesticated. It just won't do it. It is an obligate symbiote, and its requirements are incredibly uncompromising.
And this is where the story shifts from botany into an almost alien underground world. I mean, Osha doesn't just prefer its mountain soil. It requires a highly specific, invisible subterranean alliance to even exist.
Yes, it cannot live without forming a relationship with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, or AMF.
AMF, okay. And this is why farming, it doesn't work.
Right. Every single attempt by agricultural scientists and commercial growers to cultivate Osha artificially outside of its native wild subalpine habitat has completely failed.
Wow.
The difficulties start immediately, actually. The seeds themselves are notoriously stubborn. They exhibit a deep physiological dormancy that requires months of cold, moist stratification.
Stratification, like essentially surviving a simulated high-altitude mountain winter.
Exactly. You have to mimic a mountain winter just to get the seed to germinate.
But even if a grower manages to crack that seed dormancy in a greenhouse, you're saying the plant still won't survive long-term.
It might sprout, sure, and it might push up a few leaves, but without that specific fungal partner in the soil, the plant will eventually stall out, succumb to environmental stress, and die. It literally cannot reach maturity alone.
I want to really visualize this for the listener. Walk me through the actual mechanics of this underground alliance. Because how does a microscopic fungus interact with a massive root system?
Well, the mechanism is a marvel of evolutionary biology. It's known as endomycorrhizal colonization.
Endomycorrhizal, meaning inside the root.
Yes, exactly. These fungi exist throughout the subalpine soil, not as typical mushrooms, but as a massive, sprawling, microscopic thread-like network called mycelium.
Okay, mycelium.
So when an Osha seed finally germinates and pushes its first fragile root into the dark, the fungus actually senses the chemical exudates leaking from that new root.
Wait, so it actively tracks the plant down, like a bloodhound?
It does. The fungal threads, which are called hyphae, grow toward the root and actually physically breach the plant's cellular defenses. They penetrate the outer cortical cells of the Osha root.
But they don't destroy the cell, because that sounds like an infection.
It's not an infection, it's a partnership. Once inside, the fungus branches out, creating these highly intricate, microscopic, tree-like structures called arbuscules.
Arbuscules! I love this concept. I was thinking about an analogy for this earlier.
Let's hear it.
Okay, think of the Osha plant, like a billionaire industrialist who has an absolute monopoly on sugar manufacturing. But his factory is stuck on an isolated island. He has endless energy, but no raw materials to build anything else.
Okay, I'm following.
The arbuscular mycorrhizal fungus is like a global shipping syndicate. It has zero energy, no ability to make its own food, but it has millions of cargo ships spread across the entire ocean that can extract rare materials from incredibly distant, difficult-to-reach places.
That is a highly accurate analogy, actually. The trade agreement is negotiated right at the site of those arbuscules inside the plant cells.
So how does the trade actually work?
Well, the plant uses its leaves up in the mountain sunlight to photosynthesize, pulling carbon dioxide from the air and transforming it into energy-rich carbohydrates and sugars.
Right, the sugar factory.
Exactly. The fungus, which is trapped in the dark underground, is completely dependent on those sugars for survival. So the plant literally pumps its own hard-earned carbon directly into the arbuscules to feed the fungus.
And what does the shipping syndicate provide in return? Because they don't do this for free.
Far from it. The massive fungal mycelial network acts as a secondary, vastly superior root system for the Osha plant. Plant roots are relatively thick and honestly kind of clumsy,
Sure.
but fungal hyphae are microscopic. They're capable of weaving through the tiniest micropores in the soil. They can scavenge water and essential micronutrients, specifically incredibly tightly bound elements like phosphorus, nitrogen, zinc, and copper, from soil volumes miles away from what the plant could ever physically reach on its own.
So the fungus is out there mining the dirt.
Yes. The fungus mines these minerals, transports them through its vast network, and delivers them directly into the plant's cells via the arbuscules. It is a hyper-efficient, life-sustaining resource exchange.
That is just mind-blowing. And the research points out that this relationship isn't just a closed loop between one plant and one fungus. The byproducts of this alliance actually hold the mountain together. The fungi secrete a very specific compound called glomalin, right?
Glomalin is one of the most critical yet somehow underappreciated substances in terrestrial ecology. It is a sticky glycoprotein produced exclusively by these mycorrhizal fungi.
A sticky glycoprotein.
Yeah. As the fungal hyphae grow and explore the soil, they shed this glomalin. And the sticky protein physically binds microscopic, powdery soil particles together into larger, stable aggregates.
So it basically acts like biological superglue.
It's exactly like superglue. Without glomalin, subalpine soil is little more than loose dust and rock flour. By binding the soil into larger aggregates, the glomalin improves water infiltration, allows oxygen to reach deeper into the earth, and crucially, gives the soil physical structure.
So it stops erosion.
Completely. It prevents the fragile mountain slopes from simply washing away during, torrential summer thunderstorms or heavy spring snowmelt. So by feeding the fungus, the Osha plant is indirectly engineering and stabilizing the exact physical landscape it needs to survive.
That's incredible. Which, really frames the tragedy of modern human interference. If this entire mountain ecosystem relies on this microscopic, invisible trade agreement, what happens when humans bring heavy machinery or modern agricultural practices into that space?
The system shatters, and often irreversibly. The invisible alliance is incredibly sensitive to disruption.
Let's play this out. Let's say someone tries to force cultivation. They take a patch of mountain meadow, plant Osha, and then dump commercial synthetic fertilizer on it to make it grow faster. What actually happens underground?
Well, the plant abandons the partnership.
Really? Just like that?
Yes. If you flood the soil with highly soluble synthetic phosphorus or nitrogen, the Osha plant senses the sudden abundance. It realizes it no longer needs the fungal shipping syndicate to mine those nutrients.
So it cuts them off?
Immediately. It immediately stops pumping precious carbon and sugars down to the arbuscules. The plant cuts off the food supply, and the fungus starves.
And the network just dies.
The fungal network dies back completely. The symbiotic connection is severed. But here's the catch: synthetic fertilizers wash away very quickly in mountain environments.
Oh, right. Because of the rain and snowmelt.
Exactly. When the artificial nutrient spike inevitably crashes, the Osha plant is left totally alone. It hasn't developed the robust, deep root architecture it needs, and its protective fungal network is dead. The plant becomes incredibly vulnerable to drought, disease, and environmental stress, and it usually just fails.
That's a brutal irony. And it isn't just chemical disruption either. The physical disruption is just as bad. The sources talk a lot about off-road vehicles and timber harvesting.
That's a huge issue.
Right, if an ATV drives repeatedly through a subalpine meadow, the physical compaction of the soil literally crushes the architecture of the fungal mycelium. You physically break those fragile microscopic threads, the network collapses, the nutrient flow stops, and the Osha starves.
It really underscores how deeply tethered everything is in that ecosystem.
It does. And that tethering leads directly to the core of why we are even discussing this plant in the first place. Because this massive influx of scavenged micronutrients, the zinc, the copper, the deep soil phosphorus delivered by the fungi, that provides the Osha plant with an immense pool of raw chemical building blocks.
Yes, and the plant takes those raw materials and runs them through its internal laboratories to manufacture one of the most potent and highly scented phytochemical defense systems in the botanical world.
This is the perfect pivot into the chemistry. Let's unpack this. Because all of that subterranean effort is what ultimately creates the reputation of bear medicine. That distinct celery, licorice, and butterscotch smell that the toxic hemlocks try to steal. That is literally the scent of a highly complex, aggressive phytochemical arsenal.
It is. When analytical chemists run the volatile essential oils of the Osha root through gas chromatography mass spectrometry, the resulting readout is just staggering.
What are they finding in there?
They find a dizzying array of bioactive compounds, things like monoterpenes, phenolic acids, coumarins, but the absolute stars of the chemical show are a very unique class of compounds known as phthalates.
So, ladies, and the data on this is wild. I mean, phthalates make up over 44% of the plant's volatile essential oil. Nearly half of its volatile mass is dedicated to this one specific class of chemicals.
It is a massive concentration for any plant. The primary drivers of the biological activity are specific monomeric phthalates, most notably compounds like Z-ligusticide and Z-butylide nicolide. And then you have various complex dimers where these molecules bond together into larger structures.
Okay, I want to really break down what these massive concentrations of phthalates actually do inside a human body, because traditional healers haven't been using Osha for just anything. It has very specific, very consistent traditional applications for deep respiratory infections, harsh, rattling coughs, and sore throats.
Absolutely.
So when someone inhales or ingests these phthalates, what is the molecule actually doing to their tissue?
Well, preclinical laboratory models have provided some remarkable molecular validations for those exact traditional uses. These specific phthalates, particularly Z-ligusticide, are classified as potent spasmolytics.
A spasmolytic, meaning it arrests or prevents a spasm. Walk me through the mechanism of how that actually works in the lungs.
To understand that, we first have to differentiate our musculature. You have skeletal muscle, which you consciously control to, say, move your arms and legs. But you also have smooth muscle.
Smooth muscle, yeah.
Smooth muscle operates involuntarily. It lines your internal organs, your digestive tract, and crucially for this context, your bronchial passages, the tubes that carry air down into your lungs.
Got it.
When you have a severe respiratory infection, like bronchitis, those smooth muscles in your airways become highly reactive. They begin spasming and violently constricting, which triggers that uncontrollable painful coughing fit and severely limits your oxygen intake.
So you have these spasming tubes. You introduce the Z-ligusticide from the Osha root. What does the molecule physically do?
It interacts directly with the calcium channels in the smooth muscle cells. Muscle contractions actually require a massive influx of calcium ions into the cell. The Z-ligusticide essentially acts as a localized calcium channel blocker.
Oh, wow. So it physically stops the calcium.
Exactly. It prevents the calcium from flooding in, which physically forces those spasming bronchial smooth muscles to stand down, relax, and dilate.
So it's not just numbing the throat like a cough drop. It is fundamentally altering the cellular mechanics of the airway to force it open.
Yes. That acts as a powerful cough suppressant and expectorant, which allows the person to actually clear the fluid from their lungs safely.
That's amazing. But it doesn't stop there.
No, it doesn't. The chemistry of Osha operates on multiple fronts simultaneously. While the Z-ligusticide is relaxing the smooth muscle, it is also demonstrating significant anti-inflammatory actions. In laboratory cell models, these extracts have been shown to drastically reduce the expression of pro-inflammatory cytokines.
Okay, let's translate pro-inflammatory cytokines for a second, because everyone hears inflammation and thinks of like a swollen ankle or a twisted knee. But when we're talking about a systemic viral infection, what does a cytokine actually do and what does it feel like?
Cytokines are essentially chemical messengers. When your immune system detects a pathogen, it releases these messengers to sound the alarm across your body.
Like Paul Revere.
Exactly. And one of the primary alarms is a cytokine called tumor necrosis factor alpha, or TNF-alpha, along with various interleukins. These alarms tell your blood vessels to dilate, tell your body to raise its core temperature, and recruit white blood cells to the area.
Which is necessary to fight the infection, obviously, but it makes you feel absolutely miserable.
Precisely.
Like when you have the flu and your entire body aches, you have a pounding headache, you are shivering with fever, and you just feel entirely depleted. That misery isn't directly caused by the virus itself, is it? That misery is the physical sensation of your body being flooded with TNF-alpha and interleukins.
That is exactly right. The immune response is what you're actually feeling. And the phthalates in Osha essentially dial back the volume on those specific alarms.
So it turns down the misery.
By reducing the markers like TNF-alpha, The root helps calm the systemic inflammation, reducing the tissue damage and the acute physical misery of the illness, while the body can still continue to clear the pathogen. Furthermore, the phenolic acids found in the root actively elevate the body's own endogenous antioxidant defenses.
Endogenous meaning built in.
Yes, they increase cellular levels of glutathione and superoxide dismutase, which act like microscopic scrubbers. They protect your lung cells from the oxidative stress and the collateral damage caused by your own immune battle.
That is an incredibly elegant defense system, but I found one detail in the pharmacological research that completely blew my mind, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the lungs.
The alpha-glucosidase inhibitor.
Yes. The researchers isolated another compound, 3-Z-butylide naphthalide, and identified it as an alpha-glucosidase inhibitor. Walk me through this, because this is wild.
It is a fascinating and entirely different biological mechanism. Alpha-glucosidase is a highly specific enzyme located in the brush border of your small intestine.
Okay, let me try to visualize this. Imagine your digestive tract is a massive industrial processing plant. You eat a meal full of complex carbohydrates, say a huge baked potato.
Okay.
Those complex carbohydrates are essentially long, intricate chains of connected sugar molecules. But your body cannot absorb a big, long chain into the bloodstream. It needs single blocks. So you have these specialized factory workers, the alpha-glucosidase enzymes, standing on the assembly line. Their only job is to take molecular scissors and snip those long chains down into single absorbable glucose molecules.
That is a perfect visualization. So what the Osha compound does is essentially temporarily handcuff those factory workers.
It handcuffs the enzymes.
Right. By inhibiting the alpha-glucosidase enzyme, the compound physically prevents the scissors from working. The complex carbohydrates cannot be broken down as quickly, which means they cannot be absorbed rapidly into the bloodstream.
So it physically blocks the post-meal sugar spike at the very source of digestion?
It does.
Which is incredible, because that provides a hard, scientifically measurable mechanism for why traditional Hispanic and indigenous cultures in the Southwest have long used specific preparations of Osha to help manage blood sugar levels and early-stage diabetes. The molecule is literally slowing intestinal glucose absorption.
It is a profound example of traditional ecological knowledge preceding microscopic chemical analysis by centuries. I mean, they observed the physiological effects through deep clinical experience long before anyone knew what an enzyme even was.
But I have a huge practical question here regarding the modern use of this plant.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that these phthalides are highly volatile.
They're very volatile, yes.
And that volatility is why the roots smell so strongly. The molecules are just constantly evaporating off the surface into the air. So if these specific oils are the exact mechanisms driving the healing, the smooth muscle relaxation, the cytokine reduction, how do you actually keep them intact from the mountain to the patient?
That's the real challenge.
Right. Like, if a commercial harvester rips the root out of the ground, throws it in the back of a hot truck, and then tosses it into a commercial industrial dehydrator at 150 degrees to dry it quickly for market, doesn't that intense heat just destroy the very thing making it special?
It absolutely does. And this is a massive issue in the commercial herbal trade right now. Volatile means exactly what it sounds like, easily vaporized. High heat commercial drying is totally catastrophic for Osha.
It just cooks it off.
Not only does the heat rapidly evaporate the Z-ligustolide straight into the atmosphere, leaving the root completely depleted, but the intense forced air also causes rapid, unwanted oxidation.
Oxidation meaning it reacts with oxygen and changes form.
Right. It forces the remaining medicinal compounds to react with oxygen, transforming them into inert, pharmacologically useless, degraded byproducts.
Wow. So to actually preserve the medicine, you have to process it like a traditional healer. You have to dry it incredibly slowly in the shade at cool ambient temperatures, allowing it to cure over weeks rather than hours.
Exactly. The human element of processing is just as critical as the biology of the plant itself. If you rush the process to maximize commercial turnover, you don't end up with medicine. You end up with a biologically dead, expensive piece of wood.
Which transitions us beautifully into the actual history of human interaction with this plant. Because long before modern pharmaceutical labs were mapping calcium channels and running gas chromatography, the animals of the Rocky Mountains had already fully mapped Osha's chemical profile.
They absolutely had.
And the indigenous peoples of the region were paying very close attention to those animals.
The ethnobotanical heritage of Osha is incredibly deep. It's rooted in the traditional ecological knowledge of southwestern tribes, the Navajo, Apache, Zuni, Ute, Pueblo, and the Hispanic communities that have inhabited the region for centuries. And the origins of that knowledge really begin with cross-species observation.
Let's talk about the name bear root or bear medicine, because I initially assumed that was just a poetic moniker, maybe referring to the hairy collar on the root looking like bear fur, but it is entirely literal, isn't it?
It is entirely literal. It is one of the most thoroughly documented examples of zoopharmacognosy in North America.
Zoopharmacognosy, animals self-medicating.
Exactly. It's the scientific study of wild animals self-medicating with plants, soils, and insects to treat and prevent disease. Indigenous hunters and observers spent generations watching a very specific, highly ritualized behavior among brown bears and grizzly bears in the high Rockies.
And this happens right around the time they wake up from hibernation in the spring, right?
Precisely. Just consider the physiological state of a bear emerging from months of absolute dormancy in a den. Its digestive system has been totally shut down and is extremely sluggish. Its respiratory passages are often heavily congested from breathing stagnant air for months.
Right.
And its fur is usually heavily infested with ticks, mites, and various external parasites that just accumulated over the long winter.
So they are essentially waking up sick, stiff, and covered in bugs.
So what do? Traditional observers watch these bears immediately seek out subalpine meadows, dig up massive Osha roots, and begin chewing them. But they didn't just swallow them.
What did they do?
They would chew the root into a highly pungent, pulpy mash, mixing it with their saliva. Then, they would physically spit the mash into their paws and vigorously rub it deep into their own fur, focusing on their faces, necks, and chests.
They were literally making an antibacterial body wash.
Yes. They were utilizing the intensely antimicrobial and volatile oils of the plant. The puncindolines and monotropines would act as a powerful fumigant, basically warding off the insects and killing the parasites in their coats.
That is brilliant.
And furthermore, by chewing and eventually swallowing the root, they were using those exact spasmolytic properties we discussed earlier to clear their congested bronchial passages and kickstart their dormant digestive tracts.
So the indigenous observer saw this massive, powerful apex predator actively seeking out a specific root to heal itself. And the logical conclusion was, if the bear, an animal of immense physical strength and spiritual power, relies on this root for survival, we need to understand how to use it too.
Exactly. In fact, the Ute word for Osha is Quiagatu tukapi, which literally translates directly to bear medicine. And some ethnolinguists even suggest the word Osha itself might actually be a Spanish corruption of the original Zuni word for bear.
The plant and the animal are completely inextricably linked in the cultural consciousness of the region. And from those early observations of bear behavior, human traditional uses evolved into these highly sophisticated medicinal practices.
They really did. They developed deep decoctions, which means boiling the tough root for extended periods in water to extract the heavier compounds, and powerful vapor steams for severe respiratory illness.
The vapor steam makes so much sense. Like if someone in the community had a severe rattling cough or a sore throat, they would boil the root, cover the patient's head with a blanket over the pot, and have them inhale the hot steam.
Which is a brilliant delivery mechanism. By inhaling the steam, they were volatilizing the folies and delivering them directly into contact with the spasming lung tissue. It perfectly mirrors the delivery method we use in modern pharmaceutical inhalation therapy for things like asthma or COPD.
But the historical applications went so far beyond just treating a winter cold. One of the most fascinating details in the ethnobotanical research was the connection to distance running.
Oh, that's a great application.
Native American messengers and runners who had to navigate the incredibly steep, high-altitude terrain of the Rockies would carry small pieces of Osha root with them. They would chew a tiny fragment while running. Because the volatile oils act as a vasodilator and open the bronchial passages, it effectively increased their oxygen uptake and physical endurance.
It helped them stave off altitude sickness and fatigue while running at 10,000 feet. It acts as a highly effective, natural respiratory stimulant under extreme aerobic stress.
And beyond internal medicine, there were the defensive applications. I mean, the rattlesnake repellent. This absolutely blew my mind.
It sounds like pure folklore at first, doesn't it?
It totally does. The research notes that several tribes, particularly the Yuki and the Paiute, would carry bundles of Osha root, or literally tie small pieces of it to their ankles and their moccasins when they had to walk through dense brush known to harbor rattlesnakes.
Right. And it prompted modern researchers to ask an important question. Does a botanical snake repellent actually work biologically? And when you look at the anatomy of a pit viper, the biological logic is completely sound.
Let's break down how a rattlesnake actually sees the world. They rely heavily on highly sensitive chemosensory organs, right?
Very heavily.
When a snake flicks its tongue, it isn't just tasting the air, it is gathering microscopic scent particles and bringing them back inside its mouth to two tiny cavities on the roof of its palate called the Jacobson's organ.
And this organ is hypersensitive. It allows them to track the incredibly faint chemical trails of mice and navigate their environment.
But that hypersensitivity is actually their vulnerability. The intense, pungent, volatile monoterpenes and phthalates evaporating off the Osha root are incredibly aggressive compounds. For a snake utilizing the Jacobson's organ, approaching a piece of fresh Osha is the chemical equivalent of a human walking out of a dark room and staring directly into a high-powered strobe light.
That's a great way to describe it. It is an overwhelming, painful sensory disruptor.
It essentially blinds the snake's chemical sensors, which prompts it to immediately retreat from the overwhelming stimulus just to protect its navigational hardware.
It's biological pepper spray for snakes.
It really is. And those same aggressive airborne compounds made it highly valued as a ceremonial incense. Traditional communities would burn dried Osha roots, similar to how white sage is used, to purify ceremonial spaces and sick rooms.
And the science completely backs this up. The smoke actually carries those antimicrobial monoterpenes through the air, effectively neutralizing airborne pathogens in an enclosed space.
But, here is where we really need to pump the brakes and introduce another massive reality check for the listeners.
Yes, we absolutely need to address the critical issue of dosage, preparation, and contraindications.
Because if you are listening to this deep dive right now and thinking, wow, Osha is a miracle plant, I'm going to dig up a fresh root and take a giant bite to cure my cough, you are going to be in a tremendous amount of pain.
Oh, a lot of pain.
The research is highly specific about this. Fresh, undried Osha is intensely astringent and chemically aggressive.
If you chew a significant amount of fresh, uncured root, the highly concentrated volatile oils can literally cause severe chemical burns and blistering on the delicate mucous membranes of your mouth, tongue, and throat.
You'll blister your own mouth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It requires a deep understanding of the curing process to neutralize that caustic effect while actually preserving the medicinal properties. Traditional knowledge isn't merely a list of what plants to use. It is a highly technical understanding of how to prepare them safely. And just as importantly, knowing when not to use them at all.
Crucially. Because the ethnobotanical records emphasize that traditional practitioners strictly avoid administering Osha in any form during pregnancy.
Because the exact same powerful chemical mechanisms that stimulate blood flow, cause vasodilation, and relax certain tissues can act as a potent emmenagogue.
Meaning it stimulates the uterus.
It can stimulate heavy uterine contractions. Taking strong doses of Osha during pregnancy poses a severe, documented risk of inducing a miscarriage.
It is an incredibly powerful medicine, and powerful medicines demand cautious, highly informed application.
They absolutely do.
Which unfortunately leads us to the darkest, most pressing part of this deep dive. This immense, sacred cultural history, combined with a powerful chemical profile that is now being scientifically validated, has made Osha highly sought after in the modern commercial botanical and supplement market.
It's practically everywhere now.
But when ancient traditional reverence is replaced by modern, profit-driven supply chains, the actual survival of the species is thrown into immediate jeopardy.
We're looking at a severe and escalating conservation dilemma right now. Osha is currently listed on the United Plant Savers at-risk list, which monitors medicinal plants facing severe population declines in the wild.
Let's talk about why it's uniquely vulnerable to modern commerce. I mean, if you harvest elderberries, you just pick the fruit, and the bush grows more next year. If you harvest peppermint, you cut the leaves, and the roots push up new growth. But the medicinal part of the Osha plant is the root.
That's the crux of the issue.
Harvesting is inherently and unavoidably destructive. To get the medicine, you have to pull the taproot out of the earth, which completely kills the individual plant.
And as we established earlier with the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, Osha cannot be cultivated in commercial farm fields. It simply will not grow outside of its wild subalpine network. Therefore, 100% of the Osha sold in the commercial market, every tincture, every dried root bundle, every throat spray, is wild harvested.
The commercial pressure numbers are staggering. The American Herbal Products Association tracked the trade, and they estimated that around 800 kilograms of wild dried Osha root is traded annually in the U.S. alone.
Which is a huge amount when you consider the weight.
Right. Think about how incredibly light a dried root is. To reach 800 kilograms, we are talking about thousands upon thousands of mature 10 to 15-year-old plants being ripped out of the mountains every single year just to supply the supplement shelves.
This relentless demand creates a vacuum. It heavily incentivizes unregulated commercial poaching on public lands, primarily national forests. And because state and federal agencies historically have not had comprehensive tracking, permitting, or management programs specifically tailored for Osha, these massive population declines have largely been happening completely in the dark.
To combat this massive blind spot in the data, researchers from the University of Kansas, specifically a team led by Kelly Kincher's lab, teamed up with the U.S. Forest Service. And they conducted one of the most comprehensive sustainability studies ever attempted on a wild medicinal plant.
That study is a landmark piece of research.
It really is. They went up to 10,000 feet in the mountains of southern Colorado to figure out exactly how much commercial harvest these wild populations could actually withstand before collapsing entirely.
The methodology of the Kincher study is a master class in ecological field research.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't just guess. They set up rigid, long-term experimental plots.
Imagine these researchers hiking heavy surveying equipment up into these remote subalpine zones.
Right. They mapped out specific plots in both shaded forest environments and open meadow habitats. Then, they systematically applied different, highly controlled harvest pressures to simulate commercial foraging.
They literally played God with the plots. I mean, in some plots, they harvested 0% of the mature plants as a control. In others, they dug up 33% of the roots. In others, 66%. And in the final plots, they completely clear-cut 100% of the mature Osha roots. Then, they backed off and monitored the plots for years to see what would happen.
The central question was, can the harvested population actually recover? And if so, what is the exact mathematical threshold for destruction?
And what did the data show? Because I have to admit, when I read the outline for this, I was confused. We just said taking the root kills the plant. So how does a plot recover it all?
Well, it kills the specific individual you pulled up, yes.
Yeah.
But Osha doesn't grow as isolated, lonely plants. It grows in dense, interconnected colonial clumps.
Oh, I see.
When a harvester digs up a large plant, they almost invariably snap off and leave behind small fragments of the rhizome, which is the dense underground stem tissue in the disturbed soil.
Ah, so there is debris left behind.
Exactly. And the researchers discovered that if the harvest pressure isn't too severe, specifically, if it stays at or below that 33% threshold, those tiny abandoned fragments can actually survive.
Ow! They don't have roots.
Because 67% of the colony is still intact, the massive underground mycorrhizal fungal network remains highly active and healthy. The fungal network essentially acts as life support for the broken fragments, pumping them full of nutrients.
Wow.
Supplied by the fungi, those fragments engage in vegetative sprouting. They push up new leaves, begin photosynthesizing again, and over the course of 3 to 5 years, they can actually regenerate a completely new taproot, allowing the population density to recover.
That is an incredible display of resilience. The forest is literally acting as an ICU for the broken pieces. But what happens when the harvest crosses that threshold? What happened to the 66 and 100% plots?
Total systemic collapse. When you harvest that much of the colony, you pull up too many roots. The remaining plants cannot produce enough sugar to sustain the underground fungi.
The syndicate starves.
The mycelial network starves and dies. And without the fungal life support, the leftover rhizome fragments just rot in the soil. The colony cannot regenerate, and it is entirely wiped out from that location.
Based on this incredibly hard-won data, conservationists and the Forest Service have proposed a new, highly restricted rotational harvest model for public lands. They suggest allowing a maximum of a 50% harvest in a given area, but only allowing harvesters to return to that specific patch once every 10 years.
Giving these slow-growing subalpine root systems a full decade to rebuild their medicinal mass and reestablish the fungal networks.
Right. But the Kincher study also revealed a fascinating and honestly highly concerning secondary data point regarding where the plant grows best. They measured the actual biomass yield of the roots, comparing the deep forest plots under the trees to the open meadow plots.
The numbers are stark. In the open meadow, the Osha plants yielded an average of 52.2 grams of dry root mass per square meter.
Okay, 52 grams.
But just a few yards away, in the adjacent forest plots under the heavy canopy of spruce and fir trees, they only yielded 13.7 grams per square meter.
That is a massive, almost fourfold difference,
Yep.
and they are at the exact same altitude, in the exact same region, in the same soil type. Why the huge gap?
It all comes down to energy and resource competition. In the open meadow, the Osha plants receive full, unobstructed, high-altitude sunlight all day long. This maximizes their photosynthetic capacity, meaning they can produce massive amounts of sugar to feed their fungal partners, who in turn build massive roots.
That makes sense.
But in the forest, they are heavily shaded out by the evergreen tree canopy. Their photosynthesis drops. And worse, their mycorrhizal fungi are forced into direct, fierce competition for water and nutrients with the massive, deeply established root networks of mature conifer trees.
And this creates a severe behavioral incentive for commercial poachers. Think about it. If you are a harvester trying to make a living selling root by the pound, you are never going to waste your time digging up tiny, stunted 13-gram roots in the dark, tangled forest.
No, you wouldn't.
You are going to specifically target the open, sunny meadows because the roots are massive and easy to dig, which means the commercial damage isn't spread evenly across the mountain. It is intensely concentrated, ravaging the most productive, exposed, and fragile subalpine clearings, essentially stripping the best genetics out of the ecosystem entirely.
It's a really dangerous bottleneck. And if we step back and connect this hyper-modern conservation crisis to the broader sweep of human botanical history, this exact scenario has actually played out before, with tragic, irreversible consequences. Studying Osha inevitably brings to mind the ghost of Silphium.
Oh man, this is an absolute heartbreaker of a story. I really want to spend some time on this. Walk us through the history of Silphium.
Right, so Silphium was a plant in the exact same Apiaceae family as Osha. It looked very similar. It had thick roots, ribbed stalks, umbrella-like flowers.
Right.
It grew in the ancient Mediterranean, specifically restricted to a very narrow 30-mile band of dry coastal mountains near the city of Cyrene, which is in modern-day Libya.
Ugh.
Silphium was, without exaggeration, the most prized, famous, and expensive medicinal and culinary herb of the entire ancient world.
The Romans and the Greeks were just absolutely obsessed with it. It was used as a cure-all medicine, a highly coveted luxury spice in elite Roman cuisine, and most importantly, it was widely recorded as a highly effective botanical contraceptive and abortifacient.
The demand for Silphium across the Roman Empire was astronomically high. It was the absolute backbone of the Cyrenian economy. It was so immensely valuable that Julius Caesar literally kept a massive cache of dried Silphium stalks stored directly in the official Roman treasury, right alongside the gold and silver bullion.
The people of Cyrene literally stamped the image of the Silphium plant on their silver coins. In fact, historians note that the Silphium seed pod was distinctly heart-shaped, and many scholars believe that the modern symbol we use for a heart today, like when you draw a heart, actually originated from the image of the Silphium seeds stamped on ancient money. That is how deeply embedded it was in their culture.
But here is the fatal parallel to Osha. Despite decades of intense effort by the greatest agricultural minds of Rome and Greece, Silphium fiercely resisted all attempts at cultivation. It simply would not grow in farm fields in Italy or Greece.
It demanded its specific home.
Exactly. It demanded the specific wild microclimate and, presumably, the specific unmapped soil biology of the Cyrenian hills.
And because it couldn't be farmed, 100% of the Roman supply had to be wild harvested.
Exactly. And because the demand was endless and the price was exorbitant, the locals over-harvested the wild populations ruthlessly. They pulled the roots faster than the plants could regenerate. Compounding the disaster, the local Roman governors decided to maximize profits by renting the wild Silphium territory out to sheep herders.
And sheep eat everything.
The sheep loved the taste of the emerging shoots and overgrazed whatever the harvesters left behind.
It was a perfect storm of ecological mismanagement and relentless human greed. Within just a few generations, the greatest botanical treasure of the ancient world went into a death spiral. Pliny the Elder, the famous Roman historian, wrote with deep sorrow that in his entire lifetime, only a single solitary stalk of Silphium was ever found growing in Cyrene.
That's tragic.
And you know what they did? It was immediately plucked and sent to Emperor Nero as a bizarre curiosity. And then it was gone forever. Silphium was driven to total, irreversible extinction.
A plant that built economies, shaped entire cultures, and formed the backbone of ancient medicine, completely erased from the face of the earth because humans treated a wild living ecosystem as an infinite vending machine. And if we aren't incredibly careful, and if we refuse to respect the limits of wild biology, Osha is walking that exact same tightrope today.
Which brings us to a major, profound ethical shift highlighted in the ethnobotanical research we reviewed. Recognizing the growing crisis, for a long time, there were high-level discussions between the U.S. Forest Service, conservation groups, and various Native American tribes about creating ethically certified, tribal-led commercial harvests.
Right, trying to find a sustainable middle ground.
The idea was to use indigenous knowledge to harvest Osha sustainably and sell it, creating economic development for the tribes while protecting the plant. But many deeply respected indigenous elders stepped into the conversation and completely shut the idea down.
And the reasoning the elders provided gets to the absolute irreducible core of the issue. They argued forcefully that OSHA is simply too sacred to be commodified.
The quote from one of the elders in the research states it so plainly and powerfully. If bare root is harvested commercially, it will lose its power.
From a strict Western scientific standpoint, an ecologist might interpret that statement as a poetic metaphor for overharvesting, like, if you sell it commercially, the population collapses and it ceases to exist. But from an indigenous traditional ecological perspective, it is meant quite literally.
The power itself is gone.
The power of the plant, its actual ability to heal, is inextricably linked to the spiritual intention, the specific prayers, and the profound respect with which it is gathered by a healer.
Treating it as a mass market commodity, ripping it out of the earth by the thousands of kilos to be ground up, packaged in plastic, and sold on a website to strangers, fundamentally severs the spiritual and ecological reciprocity that makes it medicine in the first place.
It ceases to be a relationship between a human, a mountain, and a plant. It becomes nothing more than a transaction. And as the story of Silphium so brutally illustrates, in a pure transaction driven by volume and profit, the mountain always loses.
I think that is the perfect place to land after exploring the incredible complexity of this plant. Osha isn't just a root sitting in an amber glass bottle on a supplement shelf. It is a brilliant testament to subalpine resilience. It is a literal masterclass in chemical defense, capable of synthesizing molecules that can physically force a spasming human lung to relax, or temporarily blind the sensory organs of a hunting rattlesnake.
It's an incredibly powerful entity.
And most deeply, it acts as a sacred living bridge between ancient human culture, animal behavior, and the wild, untamed landscape of the high mountains.
The ultimate lesson of OSHA must be one of profound restraint and respect. Protecting this plant doesn't merely mean adjusting harvest quotas on a spreadsheet. It means fiercely protecting the high-altitude wild habitats it depends on.
Absolutely.
It means respecting the traditional, sustainable knowledge systems that discovered its value over millennia. And it requires us to recognize that our physical health is deeply, unavoidably tethered to the health and integrity of the wild spaces around us.
We simply cannot extract our way to wellness, which leaves you with something very specific to ponder long after this deep dive ends. We've spent this entire time exploring how this incredibly powerful plant relies entirely on an invisible, microscopic network of underground fungi just to survive. Without that hidden subterranean alliance, the plant starves and perishes.
And we barely understand it.
All right, so as human expansion continues to bulldoze, pave over, chemically alter, and compact wild landscapes across the globe, we have to ask ourselves, what other miraculous ancient subterranean alliances are we permanently severing right beneath our feet before we've even discovered they exist?